I never thought I'd spend Thanksgiving night sitting alone in my car, crying in my own driveway, afraid to go back inside my own house. But that's exactly what happened, and the woman who made me feel that way, she wasn't a stranger. She wasn't some neighbor I'd gotten into a fight with. She was my daughter-in-law, the woman my son chose, the woman I welcomed into my home with open arms, with a warm bed, and a seat at my table every single holiday for 4 years. She threw a plate at me, screamed in my face, called me selfish in front of my grandchildren, my son, and every family member I had, and my son. He just stood there. Stay with me. Because what happened after that? Nobody saw it coming. Not her. Not him. Not even me.
My name is Carol. I'm 61 years old. I live in a modest 4-bedroom house in central Ohio, the same house I've owned for over 28 years. I raised 2 kids in this house. My daughter, Melissa, who lives in Denver now with her husband and 2 beautiful boys. And my son, Daniel. My firstborn. The one I sacrificed everything for after his father walked out on us when Daniel was just 9 years old. I worked double shifts as a nurse for 15 years to keep this house. To keep the lights on. To make sure Daniel and Melissa never felt the emptiness of what their father left behind. Daniel grew up to be a good-looking, soft-spoken man. Kind. Generous. Maybe a little too generous, if I'm being honest. He has a hard time saying no to people he loves. I used to think that was one of his greatest qualities. Now I know it was the thing that almost destroyed our entire family. He met Brianna about 5 years ago. She was introduced through a mutual friend at some work event. She was attractive, confident, and she had this way of walking into a room like she already owned it. When Daniel brought her home the first time, I made pot roast. I cleaned the whole house. I bought fresh flowers. I wanted her to feel welcome. She sat at my kitchen table, looked around the room, and said, and I'll never forget this, "It's cozy. Very, lived in." I smiled. I told myself she was just nervous. I should have trusted my gut right then. They got married 2 years later. Small ceremony. I paid for a big chunk of it because Brianna's parents were, quote, going through some financial difficulties. I didn't complain. Not once. Daniel was happy. That was enough for me. They moved into an apartment nearby, but they were at my house almost every weekend. I babysat their kids, my grandchildren, Lily and Jake, whenever Brianna needed a break. I cooked. I cleaned up after them. I bought birthday presents, Christmas presents, Easter baskets. I was a resource. And for a long time, I told myself that's just what grandmothers do. But there's a fine line between being generous and being taken for granted. The first red flag I really couldn't ignore came about 1.5 years into their marriage. Daniel called me one evening, sounded stressed, and told me that they were having some cash flow problems. Brianna had quit her job, without telling Daniel beforehand, because she said the work environment was toxic. Daniel asked if they could borrow $3,000 to cover rent and groceries while she looked for something new. I said yes. I transferred the money the next day. 6 months went by. No mention of paying it back. When I gently brought it up to Daniel, he got quiet and said, "Mom, she's been dealing with a lot. Can we not make this a thing?" I dropped it. Then it happened again. This time, $4,500. "A medical bill," Daniel said. "For Lily." Again I said yes. Again, it was never mentioned again. But what started to really gnaw at me, what kept me up at night, wasn't the money. It was the way Brianna had started talking to me. It was subtle at first. Little comments. "You didn't have to bring that over, Carol, we had it handled." Or, "Daniel and I have our own way of doing things." Once, I rearranged some toys in the living room while babysitting Lily, and she came home and moved every single one back, right in front of me, without saying a word. She was marking territory. In slow motion. I talked to my daughter Melissa about it on the phone one night. "Melissa, who has always been the sharper of my two kids, said, "Mom, she's been doing this since day one. You just didn't want to see it." Maybe Melissa was right. Then came September of last year. Daniel called me excitedly to tell me they'd found a house. A beautiful 4-bedroom in a nice school district, about 20 minutes from me. "That's wonderful," I said. "How are you affording it?" "We're putting 15% down," he said. "We were hoping you could help with the closing costs." $12,000. I want you to understand something. I'm not a wealthy woman. I'm a retired nurse living on a fixed income and some savings I've been carefully protecting since I stopped working. That $12,000 represented almost a third of my accessible savings. But Daniel was my son. And I thought about all those nights I worked double shifts so he could have a warm bed. So I said yes. And 3 weeks later, they moved into their new house. Brianna didn't call to say thank you. Not a text. Not a card. Nothing. When I mentioned it to Daniel, he said, "She said thank you when we saw you last week, Mom." She hadn't. I would have remembered. Now, I need to set the scene for you, because I want you to understand exactly how this day unfolded. Every year, Thanksgiving has been at my house. Every single year for as long as my kids have been alive. It's my tradition. My kitchen. My turkey, my sweet potato casserole, my grandmother's cornbread stuffing recipe that I have never written down because it lives in my hands. 30 people. Family from my side, Daniel and Melissa's families, a few close friends. This year was no different. I'd been preparing for 2 weeks. The morning of Thanksgiving, Brianna called me. "Carol, I wanted to let you know, Daniel and I talked, and I'm going to bring the turkey this year. I'm doing it my way. I bought a pre-brined organic one from Whole Foods and I'm going to cook it here and bring it over." I paused. "Brianna, I already have my turkey. It's been thawing since Monday." "Well, we can have 2 turkeys then. I just feel like things should start changing and we should contribute more." I thought that was a little strange, but I said fine. She showed up at 2 o'clock with her turkey on a pan, her own side dishes, and an attitude I could feel from the front porch. Things were fine at first. Tense but fine. Then, and I still can't believe this happened, Brianna started rearranging my table. My table. In my house. She moved the centerpiece I'd put together. She pushed my cornbread stuffing to the far end of the table. She put her dishes front and center. I walked over and I said calmly, "I promise you I was calm. Brianna, honey, can you leave the table the way I had it? This is how I always do Thanksgiving." She turned to me slowly with this look I can only describe as pure contempt. "Carol, I'm tired of everything always being done your way. We're here every year. This is exhausting." I felt the room get quiet. My sister was standing in the corner. Melissa's husband looked at the floor. My brother-in-law pretended to check his phone. I said, keeping my voice steady, "I understand you're tired, but this is my home, and I'd appreciate." And that's when it happened. Brianna picked up a dinner plate, one of my good plates, the white ones with the gold trim I've had for 20 years, and she slammed it down on the table so hard it cracked and slid off the edge. It shattered on my kitchen floor. Lily started crying. My sister gasped. Someone said, "Oh my God!" And Brianna pointed her finger at me and said, loud enough for every person in that room to hear, "You are selfish, Carol. Everything is about you. Your house, your food, your rules. We're all tired of it. Daniel is tired of it. And I'm done pretending otherwise." I stood there. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. In 30 years of Thanksgiving dinners. In 30 years of cooking and cleaning and sacrificing and giving and loving this family with everything I had. Nobody had ever spoken to me like that. Not in my own home. I looked at my son. Daniel stood there with a plate in his hand. He looked at Brianna. He looked at me. And he said absolutely nothing. I walked to the coat closet, put on my jacket, and I walked outside to my car. I sat there in my driveway and I cried. It was 28 degrees outside and I was shaking, and I didn't know if it was from the cold or from the shock. I want to be honest with you about those next few days, because I think a lot of people would understand this. I didn't eat well. I didn't sleep well. I replayed that moment over and over like a film stuck on a loop. The plate shattering. The finger pointing. The words. "You are selfish, Carol." I've never in my life considered myself a selfish person. But when someone says something like that with such certainty, in front of everyone you love, some part of you starts to wonder. You start picking apart your whole history trying to find the proof. Was I selfish? Did I overstep? Was hosting Thanksgiving every year some sort of control thing I didn't even recognize in myself? I talked to my sister. I talked to Melissa. I called my old friend Patricia, who's known me for 40 years. Every single one of them said the same thing. "Carol, what she did was abusive. You did nothing wrong." But the person I needed to hear it from was Daniel. And Daniel didn't call me. Not that night. Not the next day. Not for 5 days. When he finally called, I almost didn't pick up. "Mom, I think we all need to just calm down and move past this." That's what he said. Move past this. I told him. "Daniel, your wife threw a plate and screamed at me in my home, in front of your children. I need an apology. A real one. Not for us to move past anything." He sighed. "Brianna was really stressed. She's been dealing with a lot." I hung up. For the first time in my life, I hung up on my son. And then I called a lawyer. Here's what most people don't know about me. I'm quiet. I'm patient. I'm the woman who always finds a way to keep the peace. But I'm also the woman who raised 2 kids alone. Who worked overnight shifts and drove them to school the next morning without complaint. Who rebuilt her entire life after a man walked out on her. I don't break. I bend for a very long time, and then I don't bend anymore. I sat down one evening with every bank statement from the past 4 years. I added it up. The money I'd lent, or apparently given, to Daniel and Brianna over the years totaled just over $41,000. Including the $12,000 for closing costs, the loans that were never repaid, the holidays I funded, the babysitting I provided that would have cost them over $800 a month if they'd hired someone. $41,000. I wrote Daniel a letter. A calm, detailed, itemized letter. I told him I loved him. I told him I always would. But I also told him I would no longer be contributing financially to their household in any capacity. I told him I was consulting with a lawyer about whether the money previously given constituted loans with an expectation of repayment. And I told him, clearly, that until Brianna apologized to me, sincerely, in person, she was not welcome in my home. Then I did something that surprised even me. I called Melissa and told her that Christmas this year would be in Ohio. At my house. And that I was only inviting people who made me feel loved. It was the first Christmas I planned for myself. Not for everyone else. For me. I want to tell you what happened next, because this part one genuinely did not see coming. 3 weeks after I sent that letter, Melissa called me. "Mom, you need to hear this. Daniel's been talking to me." Turns out, when I stopped being the financial safety net, things got very real very fast in Daniel and Brianna's house. The mortgage on the new house was stretching them thin. Brianna still hadn't found consistent work. And with my support gone, the cracks that were always there started splitting wide open. Daniel started to see, maybe for the first time, how much he'd allowed to happen. How much he'd been in the middle, saying nothing, while his wife treated his mother like a problem to manage. Then the real twist came. My sister, who was at Thanksgiving and saw everything, she'd been talking to some other family members. Word travels in families. People who'd been invited to Brianna's events, who'd always sensed something cold in her, they started quietly pulling back too. Nobody announced it. Nobody made a scene. But the invitation stopped. The warm texts slowed down. Brianna had built her confidence on being the one in charge, of Daniel, of the family gatherings, of the narrative. And quietly, without anyone making a fuss, the audience she'd been performing for simply stopped showing up. Daniel came to see me alone on a Tuesday afternoon in January. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Brianna had screamed at me, and he cried. He said, "Mom, I failed you. And I don't know how to fix it." That moment cost me more than any of the money ever did. I told him the truth. "You didn't just fail me, Daniel. You failed yourself. You taught your children that it was okay for someone to treat their grandmother that way because you didn't say a word." He sat with that for a long time. Brianna did eventually call me. About 6 weeks after Thanksgiving. She didn't exactly pour her heart out, it wasn't a movie moment. But she said she was wrong. She said she was embarrassed. She said she'd been carrying resentment she had no right to carry, and she took it out on me in a way that was unacceptable. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. I could hear it in her voice. I told her I accepted her apology. And I meant it. But I also told her, things are going to be different going forward. I love my son. I love my grandchildren. But I will not be anyone's doormat, and I will not be anyone's bank account. If you want me in your lives, it has to be with mutual respect. That's the only way this works. She said she understood. This past Christmas was the best one I've had in years. Melissa came from Denver with her boys. My sister was there. Patricia brought her famous pecan pie. My brother-in-law played guitar after dinner, and we all sang along to songs we half remembered the words to. Daniel and Brianna came. Lily and Jake ran through the house the way grandchildren should. It was quieter than past years. More careful, maybe. But it was real. At one point, Brianna walked into the kitchen while I was doing dishes and she picked up a towel and started drying without saying anything. We worked side by side for about 10 minutes in silence. Then she said quietly, "Thank you for letting us come." And I said, "Thank you for showing up differently." I don't know what the future holds for us. Some relationships get broken and they never fully go back to what they were. And honestly, maybe that's okay. Maybe the version we had before wasn't as solid as I thought it was. What I do know is this. I spent 4 years making myself smaller so other people could feel bigger. I spent 4 years writing checks and swallowing hurt feelings and telling myself that love means you give and give and give without keeping score. And here's what I learned, that's not love. That's fear. Fear of conflict. Fear of losing people. Fear of being seen as difficult. Real love has limits. Real love says, "I will be here for you, but not like this." You teach people how to treat you. And if you never say anything, they'll keep doing what works for them. I'm 61 years old, sitting in the same house I've owned for 28 years. The house I fought for. The house I built this family inside of. Nobody is throwing plates in my kitchen anymore. And nobody ever will again. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever given too much to someone who took you for granted, drop a comment below. You are not alone. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.